Good evening, everyone. It is Friday, May 14th, and we are ending the first week of one-on-one interviews with the City Council candidates who are running in the June primary. The Zebra TV and Zebra Press do not endorse any candidate, but rather present this as a public service. We go for about 30 minutes. We're asking each candidate the same set of questions. And if we have time, we will take your questions at the end. So tonight, finishing out on Friday night, I am delighted to have Canek Aguirre with me. And I swallowed that at the end, but he says I'm doing fairly well. So good evening, Canek. It's nice to have you here.
Good evening, Virginia. Pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. So before we kind of get into the meat of things, I'm going to ask you a few kind of quick fire break the ice questions. How's that? So
Sounds
how
good.
long have you lived in Alexandria?
It will be 10 years on June 3rd, maybe
Okay.
4th.
And what part of Alexandria do you live in?
So I lived in Delray for about 7 years in Auburn Village and then in Delray Central, but I now live at the Plaza on the West End, right off of Howard Street, about 2 blocks south of the hospital.
Okay. We have a lot of West End candidates this year. It's interesting. What 3 words best describe you?
Humble. I was going to say quiet, but I'm going to go with introvert, but also playful.
Okay. And what is one thing that most people would be surprised to know about you?
Probably the introvert part.
Okay. All right. That's fair. And what is your guilty food pleasure?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's probably between late night tacos and chicken and waffles.
All right. That's a pretty good twosome there. That's a pretty good twosome. So you are finishing your first term on City Council, correct?
That's right.
How did you find it?
Well, nobody runs for office thinking that they're going to have to deal with a pandemic, right? So it has been extremely interesting. It has been very humbling. It has been a huge learning experience. But I feel that going through the pandemic is really what kind of galvanized me to run for reelection. Seeing a lot of the things that were going on in the city that I wanted to address beforehand, and then how they were highlighted during the pandemic. And making sure that we don't return to business as usual in the city.
So, the pandemic aside, was it the experience? Was it what you thought it was going to be?
All that and more. It's one of those things you can never truly be ready for the entire thing, right? One of the big things that I always tell people, I knew it was going to be a lot of meetings. I didn't realize it was going to be this many meetings because, we have council assignments, and then you're preparing for the meeting for the subcommittee to the subcommittee of the other committee that eventually you need to report out to the rest of council on. So it's just the time commitment is definitely a lot heavier than I thought it was going to be. And the juggling. Councilman Chapman and the mayor actually joked about this. They're like, "Oh, you thought it was hard running the first time. Wait till this time when you're juggling all 3 things: the campaign, city council, and your day job." And I've found that to be very true.
Well, I will thank you for putting yourself out there again. The time commitment alone just stresses me, and I admire anybody who is willing to do it. It takes a toll. It's in many ways thankless. So we appreciate the fact that you are putting yourself out there again, no matter what the outcome, because it's public service. It really is.
Yes.
It is. So before I get into it, Is there anything that you would have done differently in your first term, do you think? Is there something is there something that you have really learned?
Um, this one, I have mixed feelings on because technically we're supposed to be a part-time council, right? And a lot of folks
Yes.
don't realize that this is really like a full-time job with part-time pay. And coming into it, I was like, I'm gonna answer every single email that comes in. I'm gonna be super responsive, and the reality was just it couldn't be further from what I wanted, right? So I really wish that I could be more responsive via email. I do take pride in that. Basically, anyone that asks for a meeting, I will honor that. I'll take a meeting with anyone, and
Mm-hmm.
I've met with just about everyone that's asked for one. But I bandwidth and capacity wise, the volume of email that we deal with is just overwhelming a lot of times. But the one thing that I do want to say, and I always make sure to clarify, I do read just about every single email that comes in.
Okay. Do council members have any assistants?
We have one part-time aide, and the mayor has one full-time aide.
Okay, so the entire council shares one aide.
No, we each get one
Oh, you get
individual
okay.
mhm,
Okay.
that works, part-time, so they're about 20 hours or so.
Okay. All right. Um, so I, we're going to touch on a couple of hot buttons, but as you have been out campaigning and knocking on doors and talking to people, what issues have come up the most for you?
Probably infrastructure stuff, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's sewers and flooding, or the state of our school capacity in the buildings. I'd say it's infrastructure issues more than
Okay.
anything. Although most of the time it's like, no, I figure things are going pretty well. Keep up the good work.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, that kind of leads into the question about the money that we're receiving as part of the American Rescue Plan, and the question is, do you support putting some of that money towards solving the uh, the stormwater issues that have absolutely plagued the city, uh, both this year and last year?
Well, I mean, I would go further than that. It's plagued the city for decades or even generations, right? And unfortunately, past councils didn't invest heavily enough in some of the infrastructure, and so we're stuck with footing the bill now. But I think this council's really rolled up its sleeves to try and address that. And yes, I absolutely am looking forward to using some of these ARP funds specifically for our infrastructure and for sewers. And on top of that, there's supposed to be another infrastructure bill coming, hopefully that gets passed, and we'll be able to potentially use money from there as well to continue working on our infrastructure issues in the city.
Yeah, it's kind of like a once in a lifetime opportunity, isn't it, to get this big chunk of money and to really be able to do something with it. So,
Absolutely.
um, so how did you vote on the Seminary Road project?
I voted for the road diet.
Okay. So, given what has kind of transpired since then and what we know and maybe even what we don't know, uh, the question is really, would you just simply leave it as it is? Would you reverse it, or would you be in favor of some kind of modification?
I'd be in favor of leaving it the way it is. I don't know if you've been up there at all during the pandemic, but I feel that folks have really rediscovered that stretch of road. And granted, we couldn't have predicted the pandemic. And of course, during the pandemic, more people are home. So they're utilizing that stretch of road more. But if you were to go and sit out there for 30 minutes, you'd see people on bikes, people walking their dogs, jogging. People, like I said, they're really enjoying the stretch of road, which you wouldn't see beforehand. So I think, we've made a lot of improvements so that all road users are protected, because one of the biggest issues was speeding on the road. And now if you go on the road, and the police have actually mentioned this with some officers that I've spoken with, the speed of which cars are traveling on that stretch of road has changed dramatically. We've improved, of course, crosswalks. And, we still have to see, and we'll have to study this once we go post pandemic in terms of traffic and how it's
Mm-hmm.
affecting everything. But are people still able to get to their destination? Yes. right at the tail end of when the complete road diet was completed before the pandemic hit. Were there wait times that were increased slightly? Yeah, I will totally acknowledge that. But you're talking about 2 hours in the morning, maybe, and 2 hours in the afternoon, early evening. But outside of that, the road is running great. 20 hours out of the day, and during the weekends.
Okay. I don't know that everybody agrees with you, but then that's what people do. Do you think the process was as could have been better?
Absolutely. The process absolutely could have been better. You know, it is very frustrating that we've seen such a level of, I'm just going to say it, downright kind of animosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really, ideally, I hope we could get back to a civic discourse where even if we disagree on something, we can agree to disagree and not get into extremes about how we're dealing with situations. So that's really what I'm hoping for. And again, Virginia, it was an 18-month process, right? Some folks said that, oh, I just found out. I'm like, that's not true. Everybody's been involved in this process for almost 18 months. There was a lot of outreach. There's a lot of community meetings. And I understand that people always wanted to say there was 13 civic associations that came out against it, but we have to remember, right? The civic associations don't represent everyone that lives in Alexandria. They don't include renters in their civic associations, and they have boundaries in certain locations. And we, as a council, were getting input from all of our residents, folks that were for it and folks that were against it. And I just want to squash again. There was this big idea that there was this outside influence that was just absolutely not true. And our emails were FOIA'd, and anybody could go and look at that. And I'm happy to share it as well. But I got maybe 5 emails from folks from outside the city. Everything else was coming from residents, including residents that lived on Seminary Road or right off of Seminary Road. And if you drive down Seminary Road on that stretch that we're talking about, you might just happen to see a Canek yard sign.
Well, because I don't live in that area, I didn't pay particularly a lot of attention to it. Just more of the highlights. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I do know from my experience living in Del Rey with the building of Potomac Yard is that I think people get tired when you can't help it. The process takes a long time, but from beginning to end, there is a period of like, oh my God, I can't go to another meeting.
Yeah.
And so there's a weariness that sets in that I think is it's a challenge, to keep everybody, yeah, everybody updated on everything all the time. And then maybe the challenge isn't even so much getting it out there as it is people receiving it on the other end, because we are bombarded daily with so much information.
That is, I 100% agree with that. The level of information that we're bombarded with nowadays is nothing like it was 10 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
One quick plug for the city e-alert program. If you go online to the city webpage, sign up for e-alerts, you can customize it so you receive information just from what you want to hear about.
Okay. All right. I'll take you up on that. Co-location housing on school grounds.
Yeah, so because of the level of density that we have in the city, it would be irresponsible of us to not look at everything that's on the table. Just because we're looking at it doesn't mean that we're going to do it, though, right? And this is when this goes into the conversation, then, well, we don't have enough space for our kids. Yes, 100% agree. And that's why if it came between space for the kids and housing, 100% space for the kids. Now, if people want to bring up safety issues, that's where I have a real issue, because safety for who and from whom? Because if you look at the majority of our schools, they're across the street from housing, right? Whether it's $1 million homes or public housing. So that safety, issue, like I can't jive with that. But if you want to talk about space for kids, yeah, totally with you on it.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of seems to be the consensus. I think everybody is really on board with that. It's easy to get derailed.
And the other thing is too, right? People want to frame co-location in this scary format, but you have to remember, if we have the opportunity to co-locate early ed or a health center or a rec center, then we really want to be able to take advantage of that. And I think there's great examples of that across the city.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Going back to your time on city council, um, do you see your role differently now than you did? And do you anticipate, because you've actually moved from, like, say, Delray to the West End, and we talk about how Alexandria does not have a ward system, so you really do represent everybody. How do you see your role differently? And do you anticipate reaching out to those diverse voices in a different way than you did your first time?
So I'm not sure if I'm clear on the first part of the question. On the second part, do I see it going differently? The only thing I would see differently is if I could increase my capacity to be able to communicate in Amharic and Arabic.
Mm.
Otherwise, I feel comfortable with the way I've been communicating.
Okay.
I'm not a big social media user. I basically put out information that I want the public to have. I don't get involved in back and forth on social media. I was actually off of Facebook for like, I don't know, 6 years. The only reason I got back on was specifically to use it for the campaign. So I feel comfortable with the way I'm
But
communicating.
how are you soliciting
Input
information? Yeah.
uh, from, whether it's, even though I get information on social media and I'm not responding, I still read it. Email, still read it. I like a lot of face to face. Of course, during the pandemic, you couldn't do as much, but
Right.
at the same time, I was still able to get on Zoom calls with residents of Southern Towers, residents
Okay.
from the Arlandria neighborhood. So I it's still there, and I feel comfortable with the way I'm getting information, whether it's at community meetings or being invited to speak in front of folks and to take questions and everything like that. I think that is still continued, even if it's not in person.
Okay. And you feel like you're you're hearing what you need to hear, and from the people you need to hear it from.
Yes, because
Okay.
there's definitely recurring themes within different groups, and then also drastically different points of view. I think a good example is the small area plan with Arlandria. Um, I'm really happy that it's happening. It's a Spanish focus because you get a very, very different conversation speaking with those residents as opposed to the English forums that they have on the same small
Mm-hmm.
area plan. So I think that's very critical.
Okay. Overall, do you think that city council will, now that you can actually come back together, do you think city council has learned anything overall about operating during this time period?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my bigger concern is actually the fact that this council has gotten to a really good place where we're able to communicate really well with each other. We're able to
Mm-hmm.
bounce things off each other, and we're just really gelling as a group. And so I'm a little frustrated that we're going to lose at least half of our council, right? But change is part of what happens, and
Yeah.
I've always said that competition is good for democracy. So I'll be looking forward, hopefully, number one, getting reelected, and then number two, working with future colleagues.
Okay. Lots of opportunities there.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you've actually answered all of the hot button questions plus more, which is great. So I think David and Eli, do we have some questions for you?
We have one question from the Facebook. I didn't personally understand what it meant, so take that how you will, but that was what was written kind of verbatim.
Okay. So we're going to try this. And I will tell you, I just want you to know that if there are questions that come in that we don't get to answer, you can actually go back and do this online because it just keeps running in a loop. So
Okay.
you'll have a chance to answer. Do you support the 311 request you received recently for all city employees in 2021 and the pay adjustments that were delayed or canceled due to COVID, which qualify under the American Rescue Plan?
So I think I did see that one. I need to talk to staff because I don't think we've gotten a response on that. I know that in the current budget, we did approve a 1% bonus for all staff,
Okay.
but for the pay scale part, I'm not too sure, and I'd have to know the financial implications first. Am I supportive of our staff getting raises? Yeah, I mean it's been a heck of a year, right? And even that's an understatement. So definitely something to take a look at. Right now, we can't do anything with the budget. Again, have to look at the restrictions with the American Rescue Plan funding, and then kind of take it from there.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I went back and looked at the announcement about the American Rescue Plan, just trying to read through and really see for myself what we're able to do with it. So I think there's some exciting opportunities there.
Any ideas from you, Virginia?
Well, I live in Delray. You know, I knock on wood, and I do have a wooden stool here. I live on the side of a street that does not flood.
Mm,
And I put in French drains 20 years ago. So, I mean, and I'm lucky, but I remember in the time before we did not have the French drains that I just panicked every time it rained. And it
mhm.
was like, you know, what do you do? I mean, you move everything, you pull up rugs, then you've got to go get the wet vac. I mean, it's devastating.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's pretty unacceptable that whenever it rains, that our residents would have to feel that level of anxiety or that sense of hopelessness. And so we totally heard that. We're trying to move forward as fast as possible. And part of that, we've created this advisory board that Councilman Chapman's going to be on to help hold us accountable, and to be transparent with the money, right? So not just where's the money going, but are these projects being completed in a timely fashion as well?
Yeah, and you know, if you think about it, this isn't a homeowner issue. This is about property values. It's about how the city operates and exists. I mean, I guarantee you that well, I shouldn't say that, but if you took the example of the president of a company whose home flooded, something would be done about the land that it was sitting on. You know, he's not going to. It's one thing if it's the employees, but when it's the president of the company and his home floods, then something's going to happen. And so we can't just, pass it off and say that, it only affects some people. It affects the city. It's citywide.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think this goes back to the lack of our investment in infrastructure, and I've always seen that as a strong priority. Even when I ran for the first time, one of the things that I said was investing in our infrastructure.
And I do think that infrastructure has taken on a whole new. There's a new interest in infrastructure. It's not. I think at some point people thought of infrastructure as being boring because it was just it was roads and bridges and it wasn't sexy. It wasn't the new in thing. Well, if you don't have it, then you're not going to exist.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the other hard things, right? Is because a lot of infrastructure you can't see. And so it's
Yes,
like, can't see it, don't think about it,
that's
forget
right.
about it. Yeah,
Out of sight, out of mind.
exactly.
There, and you don't see the underside of bridges, so you don't realize they're getting ready to fall down. You see potholes in the road, but you don't see the underside of a bridge.
And
All right,
Metro is another great example of that one too.
yep, it is. All right, well, we're on the same page about that. That's good. So, as we wrap up here, again, thank you for thank you for throwing your hat in the ring again. And is there anything that you would like to say to our viewers?
Well, you could learn more about me at canecforcouncil.com. You could check out my social media accounts. It's at Canek for Council. We made it very, very simple.
Yes.
um, Early voting has started. You could go to the
Yes.
elections office, which is right across the street from City Hall. They're open, I believe, 8 to 5. There's going to be a couple of days where they're going to be open on Saturdays and have some extended hours until 8 p.m. Check out the website for that. And of course, the election is on June 8th, and I truly hope to earn your vote by then.
Well, thank you, Canek. I appreciate your being here. I know you all are busy, and it's been a long week for everybody. So I hope you have a few moments to yourself this weekend. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you'll be back on Monday night when we will be talking to Marone Teklu and Mark Schiffer. So until then, read the Zebra newspaper. It's great. Thank you to our producer, David McClure, our intern, Eli Wilcox, and as always, to the person who makes this possible, Mary Wadlin, publisher of the Zebra newspaper. Good night, everybody. Good night, Canek. See you soon.
Good night. Thank you, guys.